Hi everyone, and welcome back to Ecclesiastes. We're in chapter 11, episode 11, almost at the end. Well done for hanging in thus far. Today we're picking it up in chapter 11. We're only looking at verses 1 to 6. We're going to cover the rest of the chapter with chapter 12 next time we're together. Chapter 11, 1 to 6 is great. I've found it really encouraging personally and a real challenge to me personally. It's really about living with uncertainty. Now, at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And I guess that's always the case, no matter what period of time or place you've lived in. So this is always going to be relevant. It's always going to be helpful. I'm going to read a couple of verses. It's only a short section. Make a few comments. We'll work our way through it like that. So let's have a look here in chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, even in 8. You do not know what disaster might come upon the land. Now we've got an expression, don't we? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think if you're looking for a nice little slogan to sum up the opening of chapter 11, that would be it. Diversify your interests. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Make sure that you've covered your bets. That's essentially what he's saying. Now, he's using economic language, the language of trade and commerce, but of course it applies much more widely than business, doesn't it? It applies to all of life. And the teacher here is giving us wisdom for life, maybe potentially a little bit of a warning, maybe even a little bit of a rebuke. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Why? Verse 2, because you don't know what's coming next. You don't control tomorrow. You don't know what will come tomorrow. And so therefore, it's wise to plan accordingly. Okay, that's verses 1 and 2. Let's have a look at verses 3 and 4. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, well, there it will lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant, and whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. He's picking up this idea that there is an inevitability to life that you have no control over. It's going to rain when it's going to rain. When the clouds are full, they're full. If they're not, they're not. No amount of wishing on your part is going to change that. And the same with a tree in the forest. If a tree falls in the forest, is anyone here? Well, the teacher says, if a tree falls in the forest, guess what? Wherever it falls, there it's going to lie. And you have no control over that. You don't even know when the tree falls. You can't hear it, and you certainly can't affect the trajectory of its landing. And so we pick up this idea of the inevitability of the unknown. And that can make us feel quite helpless. And it can make us feel quite powerless. He doesn't address that here, but this is the one thing he does address. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. If you wait for complete certainty before you act, you will never act. All right? If you're waiting until the clouds are just right for you to plant, well, you'll never plant. If you're waiting to look at the weather before you decide to bring in your harvest, you'll never bring in your harvest. Because the clouds are blowing here and there every day. Every moment they're different. And you can't predict exactly what they're going to be. So here he's flagging that sometimes we get paralysed by the unknown and the things we can't control. And yet he starts to introduce into this little section the idea that if you wait for complete certainty before you act, then you may never actually act at all. Let's have a look at verse 5. Because as you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, who is the maker of all things. And this is a really important verse, isn't it? He says, look, just get used to the fact that in this world where we live life under the sun, that you don't know which way the wind's going to blow. And even if you think you do, you can't control it. You don't even understand how a baby is formed in its mother's womb. I mean, these are beautiful mysteries, aren't they? We can do a lot. We've achieved a lot. But there are still so many things in this world that are complete mysteries to us. And yet, all of these things, he says, are the work of God, who is the maker of all things. God understands the wind. God understands how a child is formed in its mother's womb. You see, God is the creator, and he has power and authority over all of his creation. It's not that these things are unknowable. God knows. It's not that these things are beyond control. God has control. It's that they are beyond our knowledge and our control, but not God's. Have a look at verse 6. Sow your seed in the morning, and at the evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Now, verse 6 is really important. I think it starts to draw together some of the threads that he's been weaving through this short section. It's interesting that he concludes this section with an exhortation, perhaps even a command. Sow your seed. Get busy making decisions and taking action. Because here's the thing. When we look to the future, to the unknown, to the tree that falls in the forest that we have no control over, to the way the wind blows, to the way a baby grows, God has control. God understands, but we don't. That can make us feel really vulnerable, maybe really anxious. And so a temptation is that until we know with absolute certainty that everything is mapped out and we're safe to take the first step, we don't do anything. That can appear wise, can't it? That can appear that you're waiting to dot every I and cross every T, but the teacher tells us actually you can't live like that. That's not wise, that's foolish. Because that's assuming that you can control every possible outcome. And the reality is you can't. God can, but you can't. So stop acting like God. Stop behaving as if you have the control of God, because you don't. Let God be God and you be you. And it's really interesting that peppered throughout these 6 verses are a series of exhortations or commands. We saw the first one in verse 1, ship your grain. The second one in verse 2, invest in ventures. And the last one in verse 6, sow your seed. You see, he's saying, guys, get busy. Make decisions. Make choices. Hedge your bets. Don't put all the eggs in one basket. Make wise choices based upon the fact that disaster could come tomorrow. You've got to factor that in, right? But he's saying, don't let this become a fatalism which leaves you paralysed, unable to make a choice. That would be the worst case scenario. Make sure that you still act, even in a world of uncertainty. That expresses trust in God. That expresses faith. That is an expression that you are free to live, even in this world, which at times seems so meaningless, hevel, empty, vapid, with no guarantees. Simply because human beings cannot discern the future doesn't mean we can't act with confidence in the present. That is not a lack of faith, that is an expression of faith. There's a great book which I read years ago, it's on my shelf here somewhere, by Kevin DeYoung, and it's a book about guidance. Not exactly what we're talking about here, but a lot of parallels. But I love the title of his book. The title of his book is Just Do Something. Just do something. Stop having this mystical, sentimental, over-spiritualized view of how an uncertain world and a sovereign God works in terms of our decisions and choices. Do something. Act in faith. Step out with wisdom. I find that really reassuring. I find that a real rebuke at times. And as you think about yourself and your life and your choices and wherever you are at right now, I hope you can take this on board and it can strengthen you and encourage you to step out with confidence and with equal measure trusting in a sovereign God who is the maker of all things. Well, we're going to pick up tomorrow the end of the book. So you want to read from chapter 11, verse 7, all the way through to the end of chapter 12. Sorry, it won't be tomorrow, but it'll be shortly, and we can join back together for our final episode. Look forward to seeing you then.